About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore a few relevant news items, and I'll answer any questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, through these programs over the last couple of years, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: our normal awareness, the conscious mind, what keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and our beliefs about threats and dangers, the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness, so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network or structure in the brain. This means that we perceive, we see, hear, taste, smell, and feel what our brains expect to experience based on the past. We learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue, and we saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and before we're aware of it. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. Based on all of this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity in the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the brain and body. It's possible to measure at least a portion of this field as electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. This means that the brain is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body as the subconscious mind. Some researchers are exploring how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information we receive, from the world through the left hemisphere of the cerebral cortex, and from our mind through the right hemisphere and probably other areas. We've learned that this field of mind affects energy and matter around us in a variety of ways. Clearly, the quantum physics experiment, where subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them, and also when people's bodies and their pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, however far away they may be. We've also seen that individuals and the collective human mind change the readouts from random number generators, as on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and they can vibrate along similar patterns, resonating with each other. Some minds can affect each other across space and time. Some researchers are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. As a result of all of this work, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field, equating mind with the quantum, or zero-point field, out of which all matter and all energy arise. Together, these understandings are helping explain things like the law of attraction, that is, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focused on, how we can access information through insight, intuition, and channeling, how our dreams affect the body and our consciousness, how music affects the brain and the body and sometimes connects us with other fields of mind, how we can enhance or slow down healing in the body through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, and how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing in the placebo effect, how remote viewing and telekinesis work, and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, and Noetic is spelled Noetic. There you'll also find links to the clips and the books and the authors that I refer to on the show. Today, we're going to find out what one of the inventors of the microprocessor has gone through in his shift from believing that all mental activity is a function of the brain to understanding that it is a greater consciousness. This is a wonderful Italian man, Federico Fagin. I'll let him share his story.
Not understand how consciousness could emerge from a computer that, where there are only electrical signals, and therefore from the brain, as science is telling us, which has electrical and electrochemical signals and molecules and so on, it didn't make sense to me. And so I started studying whether I could or could not have a computer be conscious. And the more I studied, the more I tried to make it happen, the more impossible it became. And so it was in this milieu, in this questioning that was going on within me, that I had an extraordinary experience of consciousness that told me that consciousness was even much more than I thought it was. And so after that experience, it was clear that consciousness was something way beyond what science was even hinting at, and I needed to explore it because that experience was so powerful and so life-changing that I could not let it go. And it was through this process that I arrived at the conclusion about 20 years later that consciousness must be fundamental. It must be the starting point of reality as opposed to the ending point of an evolution that created us. So that experience essentially allowed me to see myself as the world that observes itself through my point of view. So I was a point of view of the world that observes itself with that point of view, which is, completely different than what was my sense of self. I perceive myself as a separate from the world, observing the world outside of me. And so I was certainly not the world. I was simply something other than the world. Now I am the world observing myself, and the world is love. The world is joy, is peace, is something that I never felt like that before. So how can I be not only the world, but a world that is so unbelievably familiar at some level, and yet so powerful and incredible. At that time, also, my body was resonating with that experience. So my body was hot, like my cells were completely, all vibrating together. And I saw basically it was a white scintillating light, and I understood that white scintillating light was the stuff of which everything is made. So everything was in resonance, so to speak, and it was the first unitive experience that I had. I then understood for the first time what was meant for a spiritual experience. A spiritual experience is one that makes you be one, makes you feel, makes you live yourself as one with the world.
So the experience of being the mind that we are, rather than being the default structure in the brain that tells us it's all about our perceptions, leads to a couple of things that we saw and heard in our last session, talking about rainbow body, light body, the practice in Dzogchen Tibetan Buddhism, in which people are learning to consciously experience what Engineer Fagin experienced. We don't know exactly how, but apparently spontaneously. So the people going into the meditative state that we talked about last week are people who have been told and have seen evidence that this is possible. And this man has discovered through the experience what is possible. Fascinating, isn't it? That life can give us exactly what we're ready to experience. And this is one of the contributing ideas to the idea of mind as a universal field. The universe, the experience, what Fagin is calling the world, is constantly giving us, providing, responding to the need for development that we are ready to experience. In another way of looking at it, the law of attraction is at work, even when we don't know that we're focusing or ready for the next step in our conscious awareness. Here is a computer engineer, trained in physics, totally based on the notion that everything is material, realizing that because the brain cell works like the microprocessors that he was building and developing for computers, seeing that didn't seem to be able to explain, and he had tried many, many different ways to make it happen. He found that electrical systems simply are not enough for the experience that we call consciousness or mind. So as he's puzzling with it, he slipped into this marvelous experience that woke him up to a whole different understanding, an understanding that has been present in spiritual traditions for a very long time, which is why he called the experience a spiritual experience. Some people call it a mystical experience or an ecstatic experience, that experience of knowing that I am not just this body, but that who I am supersedes this body and contains this body and is part of something that is so much greater than this body that it's almost, as the vernacular puts it, mind-blowing. And in fact, what is blown is the default structure. That assumptions, set of trainings that our brains have been given over a lifetime that says it's all about the physical world, it's all about the five senses, that nothing else is real until something else is even more real. It's a fascinating experience, and it's something that almost everyone who has had a radical shift out of the materialist physical explanation of mind has gone through in some form or another. And what's really interesting is unless they have taken the training, such as the Buddhist nuns we talked about last week, unless they've taken that training, it seems to happen spontaneously. My favorite story is a man was at a cocktail party in L.A. He stepped out onto the balcony. He looked up at the sky, and the next thing he knew, the sky and he were one. And he had no preparation for it, no understanding of what was going on. And it was years before he could reconcile it. And he did so by studying the spiritual traditions, because that's the only place he could learn it. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, a radio show exploring what consciousness is, how it works, and how our lives can be greatly enhanced as we understand it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and that sound tells me it's time to shift gears, to look at a book, to answer any questions you've emailed to me at, which is ruth@noeticmoments.org, and to maybe take a look at what's going on in the news that can help us understand the role that our state of consciousness plays in our experience. And today I'm actually going to continue this topic, the idea of the moment of spiritual awakening. Any of you who have read the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle are familiar with his introductory material, where he says he was miserable and depressed and had decided that this night was his very last night, and then the sun came up in the morning and his whole world was completely transformed, and he lived in light and in love for a number of weeks and months there following. The power of now. And he talks about the experience and how to have that same kind of experience in the world. But there are plenty of other books out there, and some of the favorite ones of my friends are things like Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, and Coelho is spelled Coelho, in which the main character in the story is given experiences that ultimately lead to a spiritual awakening. And there's, of course, that very early book in the baby boomers' search, M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, in which he explains some of how it is that people have those experiences. And if you do better with fiction, you can also try Hermann Hesse's book Siddhartha, which is an alternative version of how the Buddha became the Buddha. And it is a marvelous story showing his process of waking up, of becoming enlightened, which, by the way, is what the word Buddha means, the awakened one. And now lots of other books have come out since then, and if you were to do a Google search on spiritual awakening, you will find all kinds of books. They're varying degrees of effectiveness and ability to help folks, but there is one that I think would be a nice reader, if you will. It's called The Spiritual Awakening Guide. The subtitle is Kundalini, Psychic Abilities, and the Conditioned Layers of Reality. It came out in 2015. The author is Mary Mueller-Schutan. Mueller, Mueller, and Schutan, Shutan. I assume that's the pronunciation. And it says, the first modern comprehensive resource on spiritual awakenings. This pragmatic, clear guide covers everything from the first step on a spiritual journey to enlightenment and the different types of spiritual awakenings, from mild to dramatic, that we may go through. Using the concept of the 12 layers that cover an awakened state, the author addresses every step of the journey, starting with the self, and showing how family, ancestral, past lives, karmic, archetypal, and other larger layers such as societal, cultural, global, and cosmic energies condition us to sleep and obscure our realization of an awakened state. So as I say, the book was published in 2015. The publisher is Findhorn Press in Scotland. And those of you who know about Findhorn know that that's a pretty high recommendation. Things that are associated with Findhorn generally are stretching people's knowledge pretty effectively. She has divided the book into several parts. The first one is called Awakening and the 12 Layers of Conditioned Reality. She talks about the awakening process, the sleeper, the somewhat awakened, ego awakening, between awake and asleep, the first stage of awakening. Then she goes into those 12 layers. She provides exercises for each of the layers that she describes, and they're pretty interesting exercises. I'm going to go the first layer she calls the destroyer, the second layer, mythic influences, the third layer, archetypal influences, and in that third layer, the exercise is releasing archetypes and then working within the divine treasury. Part 2 is called Types of Awakenings, the gradual awakening, the sudden awakening, energetic transmissions. This would be what a guru does, perhaps, with a chela to help awaken that person. She says awakening through place or event, subtle energy awakenings, etc. And then she goes through the chakras with exercises for each of the chakras. Part 3 is sudden awakenings, top-down awakenings, psychic awakenings, kundalini awakening, shamanic awakening, occult awakening, religious awakening, walk-ins. And if you don't know about walk-ins, that's the idea that someone's life body continues, for example, the mother of several children, but the mother has left the body and someone else is now occupying it, taking care of those children. A walk-in, that someone else is a soul that has been needing a body to fulfill their expectations and obligations. The next one is possession entity awakening, which is very similar, and that is where both people, the soul that is associated with the body and has developed with the body, and some other entity are trying to work together, and they are awakening in that process. Non-human origin awakenings. Indigo, always awake. And these are the children that were identified starting in the 1980s and 90s who seem to be aware of many lifetimes, of their telepathic connections, their full consciousness almost from birth. Then part 4 is common experiences of awakening, and she talks about physical sensations. You may recall that our engineer a few minutes ago was saying during this experience his body was extra warm, he saw this light, he felt this tingling, all of those things that the nuns felt through their practices, he felt spontaneously. So spontaneous movements and vocalizations, chills, spiritual depression, and cognition issues. If you have one of these experiences and you can't make sense out of it, you're likely to go into what is called a spiritual emergency. And one of Freud's colleagues, Roberto Assagioli, actually published a paper in the late 50s, early 60s, trying to help therapists understand the difference between a spiritual emergency and a psychotic break, and how to support someone going through that kind of emergency. Marvelous paper, and if your therapist isn't aware of the difference, you might want to turn them on to it. It's available online. Roberto Assagioli. And some of the other physical issues, digestive issues, and shifting the diet, headaches, eyes, emotional fluctuations, and then alteration of belief systems and the release of behaviors associated with them. Some people actually medicate themselves because they can't deal with it, so they might go into some form of drug abuse, and she talks about that. There's an epilogue and an about the author at the end of the book. So in the About the Author, Mary Mueller Schutan is a spiritual teacher and author. She holds a master's degree in Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbalism, is a diplomate of craniosacral therapy, and has extensively studied bodywork, energy work, and spiritual healing. She's been interested in spiritual mystical topics since she was a young child. She began to experience a Kundalini awakening in 2003, spent her next decade of her life devoted to study, meditation, ritual work, and her clinical practice. Known for her clarity and straightforward nature, her books, blogs, and teachings are for people seeking depth, authenticity, as well as spiritual and energetic tools. Well, clearly she is open to a variety of more occult and esoteric ideas, as in the ideas of walk-ins and possessions. And I defined them, but we do not have any scientific basis for that. That's all anecdotal and channeled information. As I can learn more about it, I will definitely be sharing things like whatever research we can find that suggests that the soul of another being, the mind of another being, can occupy anyone's body at any time. So it's quite the resource. The Spiritual Awakening Guide, the author's last name is Shutan, S-H-U-T-A-N, and it's available in paperback. Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are links to archived past shows, along with the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. If you happen to go back into that site and you did not listen to the early shows, I strongly recommend it. The first 10 or 20 shows really lay the groundwork for all the rest. But you can pick and choose as it serves you, of course. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.